Good morning. Today we will look at 2 Samuel 15 through 18. As we finished chapter 14 on Saturday, Absalom had gotten back into the good graces of his father, King David. Absalom had killed his brother Amnon and had fled and had then come back to Jerusalem and lived there for a couple of years and wanted to see the king, but Joab wasn't allowing that, but it finally happened. And the king, kissed Absalom, welcomed him back into his presence at the end of chapter 14. Chapter 15 begins with Absalom plotting against the king, setting himself by the gate, talking to people as they're coming to see the king, trying to solve their issues and by himself, and getting the people to look to him rather than to look to King David. And in verse 7, now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, let me go to Hebron that I may make a vow, fulfill a vow to the Lord. So he goes, and on the way he's taking some of David's loyal men with him, but he's got these others as well that when he gets to Hebron, long live King Absalom of Israel. And he's got himself set up that way with, for mutiny, basically. And the word comes back to David, and David, it just seems strange to me that David, the king, has got all these men, but yet David flees to Jerusalem, takes the Ark of the Covenant with him, and they go a ways, and then David says to the priest, take the Ark back, and if it pleases God, I will return again one day. But David and his men flee, and a lot of men. And Absalom comes back to Jerusalem and finds David and David's men gone. And David is, he's fleeing. He's come up to the mountain where he had worshipped God, and some of these other tribes, these other men, are going with David, and David, says, well, maybe you should go back. Maybe you should do other. And these people are loyal to David, and so we find that not everybody is in cahoots with Absalom. Chapter 16, when David was a little past the top of the mountain, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, however, Saul's son with the crippled feet, meets him there, and he brings bread and raisins and summer fruits and wine and things to refresh the king on his journey. And so Ziba is repaying David and David's men for the kindness that David has shown to not only to Ziba but to Mephibosheth, Saul's son. And then when he gets to another place, there's a man that says, a man from the family of the house of Saul, so a nephew or whatever, not a direct son or anything. But he comes out cursing David and throwing stones at him. And of course, David's men, they want to put this guy away, And David says, no, maybe God told him to do that, so just let him do it. And so as David and his men travel along, this guy is going alongside, cursing David, throwing stones at him, and it's just, there's so much that just doesn't make sense. But yet, David understands this person's frustration and anger, and says, "Let him curse me." And as David and his men are traveling, then Absalom is there in Jerusalem, and this Ahithophel, we'll just say his name that way, came to Absalom, and they wondered why his loyalty wasn't with David. Why had he come back? And he, he said, "Well, I will choose to serve the men of Israel. I will serve Absalom. Why should I not serve in the presence of his son? I served his dad. I'll serve you now that way." So they ask Absalom, or they ask Ahithophel for his advice, and Ahithophel gives this kind of bad advice is what I would look at it. And then he is asked if Absalom should pursue David. And yeah, go, is the advice of Ahithophel. And but then Absalom consults another man, Hushai, and he says, no, you should not go. The advice, so the second one says the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. You know your father and his men. Your father's going to be hiding out in the cave. He's not going to be with the men. So you should wait until they're going to all be together and we can get them all at one time. And so this Ahithophel, who had been faithful to David, tells Absalom pursue him and everything. But then the second man, Hushai, who that told Absalom not to, in verse 15, he sends men to tell David, to warn David. So the person we think should be loyal to David isn't, and the person that may not have quite as much reason to be loyal to David sends warning to David. And these men that are sent, Zadok and Abiathar, are sent, or the men that are sent anyway, are found out that they're on the way, and they send people looking for them. But this woman has hid them in a well, covered the well, and made it look like it hadn't been opened or anything. So they couldn't find any trace of these guys. So the searchers go back, and of course then the men sent to David come out of the well and escape and go and warn David. In chapter 18 is the culmination of all of this stuff by Absalom trying to become king, and he did serve as king, sorta. But the battle lines are drawn, and David sends his men out to do battle against Absalom and Absalom's men, and David gives the order, to spare Absalom, even though his son has done this mutiny and kicked him off of the throne and all of this and cheated him and everything that way. David's love for his son is so much that he says, you can kill every man that he's got, basically, but please don't kill my son. And, it's just kind of, Absalom is riding on a mule, and the mule goes under the thick branches of a big tree. And it says that his head and his hair were caught in the branches of this tree, and the donkey, keeps going. So here he's hanging in this tree, with his head caught somehow, and he is discovered there, and Joab, the one who had been the head commander of David's army, is told by one of his other men that, he saw this Absalom hanging in a tree. Verse 10, now a certain man saw it, so we don't know who that is. And Joab said to him, you saw him, why didn't you strike him there to the ground, But the man says to Joab, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. And besides that, the king said not to. However, Joab goes and, it says took 3 spears and thrust them into his heart. And then other men surrounded him, struck him, and killed him. And so they decided to send messengers to David then to tell him of the defeat of Absalom's army plus the death of Absalom. And he sends first a man who is a Cushite, a foreigner, with the news. But then another person comes, Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, who is an Israelite, says that he wants to run with this Cushite to tell David the news. And the Israelite outruns the other guy and gives David the news of the victory. But then when the second man comes, he tells King David that his son Absalom has died in the battle. And as much as it must have pained David to have his son, take over the throne and all of that stuff, it says that the king wept, the king mourned for the death of his son. He said, if only I had died in your place. David would gladly have let Absalom rule and not contested that at all. But that's not the way it happened. And it just, to me, it's another example of how, as a parent, the love we have for our children is it's got no limit, and that's the love that God has for you and for me. There is no limit to that love that God has for us, and as we well know, that's why Jesus came, because of God's love. And so we see that modeled here in David, the love that David had for his son Absalom, even though Absalom had just done a terrible thing. David's love for him was to be gracious and to be forgiving.